at creating some of the data that we need to put in terms of the spend money field into the basic transactions we have here. Let's start with this issue here. This is the bank account information. That account number, remember, is the actual bank. And then we have a date field, we have the description, the memo, and then we have the exclusive tax amount, the inclusive, which are both the same, and there's no tax code because it belongs to the bank. So let's try and convert this information to represent that particular line, this one here. So you need to know what your mobile bank account number is, or your software bank account number. We know it's 11110. Moreover, we know that this account is going to apply to every single transaction that we can see in that field. Just bring this up a little bit. So this clearly is the number that applies. As far as the allocation account number goes, there isn't one. Remember, that's the so-called expense account, but we have that here now in the check account. The ex-tax amount is going to be the same as the inclusive tax amount. Now, the way to do that is to open up a new column here and then just do a plus and then copy the field across. Now, the reason for this is we just want to, this is a technique that doesn't need to happen, but I'm going to go do a bit of this just for consistency of how we're going to run it. If you then copy all this, and again, this isn't necessary because these are data fields, but just get in the habit of doing this. Do a copy, then paste it in here, and when you paste, do what's called a paste special and paste values. Now, we sort of already have values, but if you do this in Excel as standard, you avoid pasting formulas, which can be a real problem when you're trying to work with spreadsheets where the only thing that really matters is that you've got the correct data in the field. You're trying to avoid formulas within the field. So we paste that information in there. Now, the next thing we need to do is just format this so that it has the same formatting as the other field. So we'll just format the cells and we'll make that currency with 2 decimal places. Now, we no longer need this area here, so we can delete that. If you look at it now then, we have a tax exclusive, tax inclusive, we've got the description, memo, we've got a date, and we've got the check account. We actually have all the data on this line here. We now have it in our data field here. The problem is we need the second and the third line. Now, the quickest way to do this is to copy and paste this information. So again, let's just take an entire copy of all this information and then bring it down. And again, just to be on the safe side, you do your paste. And this is just to get into the habit of doing this. And we now have a paste of all that information. So we've repeated it. Now the difference is, of course, that this information beneath the flashing dotted line there needs to be treated differently than the information above, even though it is the same information. And I'm going to continue on with that. Now, one of the first things to do is to look at the issue surrounding GST. And one of the beauties of coding into spreadsheets as opposed to into accounting software direct, most accounting software, if you want to code GST, you've got to go through the rigmarole of entering a transaction, opening it up, putting the GST code in. But if most expenses will have GST on them, so you could pretty much put a GST code here, and be careful you don't go back beneath this line of 11110 because that is not to be interfered with. That data is finished, remember. If we copy that down, we now have GST on all our transactions for the GST code. Now, in a lot of cases, you should know this. For example, this has got GST on it. Just bring this up a bit more. And you can check the checks if they have GST. Now, bank fees don't normally have GST, so I'm going to take the view that there is no GST on the bank fees, so put no tax. Again, you have to look at the tax code of the software you use. That should be easy. We're going to assume the rest has GST, but you would have checked that. Again, it's not that difficult because most of them do. The next issue, remember, is from our original sheet, if you look back here, we have a tax exclusive amount which has no GST. Now what we need to do is change these fields here so there is a tax exclusive amount that doesn't have GST on there. Again, very easy to do. The GST, basically exclusive amount, and we'll just run it through this cell here, you just divide that by 11 and you multiply it by 10 in the formula at the top here, and then you run that. Now when you've done that, fill that formula down and you now have the GST exclusive amount for all those transactions. Now again, just do some formatting to bring this into the standard formatting that exists in the other cell. So we do format cells, make it a currency, 2 decimal places, we've got that figure. Now what we need to do in the GST exclusive amount, we need to cut and paste this information, or copy and paste. Let's just do a copy. And again, be very careful, you line it up properly, you do it slowly, and be careful with it. And remember, do a special paste, values only, otherwise you will paste the formula. Place that in, you now have the GST exclusive amount entered. And we'll now go and get rid of this. Now we need to put the tax amount. Now the tax amount is the GST itself. The best way to do this is create a field, and again just check to make sure you've got the correct line. You take the full amount including GST, you subtract the amount excluding GST, and then you get the actual GST amount. Fill that down, and there is your GST that pertains to those transactions. Now if you do it this way, it'll always add up. If you try and do it with a formula by division, you may end up getting a few cents out, which will be a problem in your accounting file. Again, you do a copy, and then you paste it into the tax amount, and you paste a special values only. We now have our GST. So effectively now, we have all the information we need. The thing we are still lacking is the allocation account code. That is the actual account expense code that relates to these areas. Now you'll have to look these up. It's much better to put them in here. In fact, you need to put them in here. It's a lot quicker. Now you can sort the information again to try and enter those codes. If you think about it, you could sort this information to line up like expenses. What I'm going to do now is put these codes in, and I'll just pause the presentation as I do this. And what you would need to do, of course, is go through and enter those, and I'll join you when I've got them all in. Right, we have now entered all the accounting code information. So these represent here the expense accounts that are going to be the 5-digit numbers that go as MYOB users for expense codes, whatever your software has. Same principle, of course. All right, with these codes entered, we actually have all the information. If you look at the file, we now have all the information that we need. For the check account line, as discussed earlier, we have the information. For the actual expense line, the second one that's here, we also have the exact information we need. Let's just quickly review that. If you select this one here, we now have the date, we have the description, we have the account code, we have the ex-tax amount, the inclusive tax amount, we have the GST, and we also have the tax amount. So we've got all our information. We've got one thing left that we've got to do, and that is we have to get the data looking exactly the same as it is above. We have to split it, line it up, and then get the information to have a space between them. Very easy to do. What you need to do is you do what's called a fill series entry. If you put a 1 in here and then highlight these cells down to the end of that group, then go fill with a series. I'll just bring this up so it's a bit easier to see. Hopefully I can bring this down here. Just go back a bit. You fill your series. Stepping at 1, what it'll do is it'll fill this area here in sequence down to the last field. So we'll quickly do that, and you'll see you have 14 entries. Now this is important because this is going to be how we sort the information to produce the top spreadsheet in terms of the way it's listed. Now all we need to do, and do this carefully, is copy this and paste. Now paste a special again. Sometimes it's easier to do it this way. And this is the interesting bit. Remember, we need blank lines as well, so we do this one more time. Copy, paste a special. Now we have 14 lines of information with the bank, 14 lines with the expense account, and 14 lines with nothing in there in particular. The reason this is so important is we can now do a sort of information. If you select all this information and run it across, be careful you've got it all. Again, always check what you're doing, particularly when you're working with spreadsheets. We've got it all selected. We don't need that last one there. It may not make a lot of difference, but we'll get it right. Okay, we now need to do a sort, and we need to sort it by the A field. So if we go to Data, and we do a sort, and we do a sort by selecting the A column, what you will see is all of a sudden our information looks exactly like we want it. Now let's just review this. Let's drop this down a bit. So looking at that first transaction, we've got our bank account, our date, we've got our description. This is empty. That has the excluding tax amount, including tax amount, both the same. Tax code, nothing. Tax amount, nothing. The next line, no account code here. We have our date, nothing in there. We have our description again. We have our account here. We have our exclusive amount correctly. We have our inclusive amount. We have our GST, and we have our tax amount. We then have a blank line, and we're off again. We now have our information. Now, we don't need this field anymore, so let's get rid of that. We now have our CSV data file in exactly the format we need to do an import. And what we're going to do in the next chapter is have a look at this import.